One of the cases they didn't take had to do with taxing the um, employees, right? So generally, you pay, especially here in Chicago. So many people come from Wisconsin or right over the border in Indiana, and they work in Illinois. And so then the question becomes, well, where do they pay their taxes? Generally, if your company is in Illinois, then you have to pay Illinois taxes. But what happens when you don't go to Illinois, even though you work for an Illinois company? Okay, so that's really what's going on here. And um, so there's a number of there's a number of articles about this. This was my favorite article. I don't know what happened to it, but Forbes has an article, and here it is. Supreme Court won't hear New Hampshire's remote workers case, but this tax fight is far from over, right? Because it's not going to. Remote working is here to stay, right? So if it was all going back, what happened was in Massachusetts passed an emergency law that said, hey, even though these people aren't coming into Massachusetts, we want to charge them. They're paying a 5% tax to Massachusetts, and even though they're not coming here, they still have to pay their taxes. And so they passed an emergency rule that said that they did. New Hampshire, Governor Sununu in New Hampshire brought a case. And last October, it brought a case against Massachusetts. And this is the case that the courts have denied. So let's read a little bit about this. The U.S. Supreme Court said this week that it won't hear a case. I already told you that. But with the increase in work at home, thanks to the habits formed during the pandemic, the issue of which state gets tax incomes of their workers is unlikely to go away. So here, Massachusetts is relying on these people. And what if they never come back into the state? Well, then legally they can't tax them. So this case before the court was dealt with New Hampshire. But Massachusetts' convenience rule allowing out-of-state taxation is an established practice by 6 other states also, Arkansas, and they list these other states. And broad ruling by the Supreme Court could have impacted more than 2 million Americans, and probably more than that coming up, right? I mean, it's going to make a big difference. One of the big problems with New Hampshire's case is the question of harm, she said. The state doesn't tax income, so it's not directly losing potential income for tax revenue. So again, people live in New Hampshire. New Hampshire doesn't have a state income tax, and so they're working for a company that's in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts saying, "Hey, pay us the tax." And New Hampshire feels like they're being slighted, that their citizens are being slighted, and actually they are, right? Now they say, Massachusetts said, well, we're just keeping the status quo, because if we didn't have this emergency and we didn't have a lockdown, those people would be traveling into Massachusetts and we would be getting their money. Well, again, I think that's a good argument if you're on their side. But, the fact is they weren't in Massachusetts. They didn't work in Massachusetts. They worked in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire doesn't have a income tax. So should they pay income tax? So there's a lot going on. Now, again, many people now are talking. Here's another article about the same thing in accountancy, because this has to do with taxes. Now, but think about this. If you're going to, everybody's talking, well, I can move from everywhere. I know people, you probably know people who moved. I know people moved to Colorado, moved to Montana is a big hot state now, because a lot of people can work anywhere from anywhere. And so they're moving to places like Montana, Wyoming, lower taxes, beautiful country. They could buy a big home with a great view for the same money. They could buy a smaller home here without a great view. And so they're moving to these places. But nobody's thinking about what the ramifications of that is. How is that going to affect my taxes? It may be that you're going to have to pay taxes in 2 places. Some states have what they call reciprocal agreements, where if you pay taxes in one state, it will override the taxes in another state. I believe Indiana and Chicago have this. In Illinois, I should say, have this agreement, reciprocal agreement. You tax our people, we'll tax your people, and they hope that it works out the same. But some states don't, and so when they don't have the reciprocal agreement, you wind up paying 2 taxes, right? And it gets even more complicated, right? If you move to Paradise, well, where do remote employees pay taxes? Out-of-state remote workers. What happens if you go to Belize? What if you go to the Bahamas? If you move to Europe, a lot of countries are seeing that this are seeing this move, and they're encouraging it. They're offering visas for people to come out and move there and live there and work there for tax advantages. Okay, but here's another thing. Now, not only does it affect the employee, but what about the employers? Right now, if I'm an employer and I'm in Massachusetts, say, now my employees are working in New Hampshire. Well, New Hampshire, again, they don't have the state income tax, but they have other taxes. They have workers' comp tax. They have many other taxes that the municipality is going to have to pay. And so if I'm an employer, now I have to worry about where my employees are working, because I'm going to have to pay taxes in all of those different locations, and not only income tax, but all these other taxes, and some have excise taxes, and some have they get very complicated in the taxes that they can impose on the employer. And so now if I'm in one location, I have to worry about one location and their tax policies. But if I have employees all over the country, sometimes all over the world, now I got to worry about all of these tax ramifications all over the country, all over the world. It gets really complicated.